How do I go about cancelling my subscription to 2021? I tried the 7-day free trial and I was not impressed. Like me, I'm sure you were dismayed at the appalling scenes of violence at the US Capitol last week, where several people lost their lives. Soon afterwards, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, was suspended from Twitter because they said he was guilty of incitement to violence. Now, I want to talk more about Trump's suspension from Twitter in a separate video that we'll be uploading shortly, and you'll find that on our channel. But instead today, I want to talk about what we are witnessing, which is the breakdown of civility in America and beyond. How do we come to this? And is there anything that we can do about it? Society breaks down and civil war begins when basic respect for one another breaks down. Now, why would basic respect for one another break down? We're not born with hatred, are we? No, we're not. Hatred is learned. It's built on a series of foundations which appear as rational, but they're not. I find it amazing how you can always find wisdom that's applicable to current events in each week's Torah reading. And the Torah reading that the Jewish people read on Shabbat just last week began with Pharaoh rallying the Egyptians against the Jews, saying, quote, "They're growing so fast and numerous, it's only a matter of time before they try to destroy us." Hatred is framed through reasoning, security, and safety. This is just a matter of national security and preservation, that's all, Pharaoh said. Of course it was all a lie, but that's how it starts. Hatred and violence happen in religion too, in what the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks referred to as dualism, where religion divides the world into forces for good and forces for evil, where they can end up labeling groups of people literally as satanic, forces for evil. And yes, it happens in politics too, as we have witnessed in recent times. And society breaks down when you start to treat certain groups of people as evil rather than ideas as evil, when instead of calling someone wrong, you call them evil. Now yes, maybe sometimes people can do something so bad that it does make them evil, but most of the time, civil discourse doesn't need to go that far. And once it does, rightly or wrongly, civil discourse comes to an end. Those people who stormed the Capitol didn't think their opponents were wrong. They thought they were evil, hell-bent on destroying their country. And let's be honest, this happens on both sides of the political aisle. This was not the only instance of civil violence towards innocent people that we've seen in recent times in America. We saw just over the summer the violence, burned buildings and businesses, and the looting, which happened because a group of people saw their opponents, perhaps even most of society, as evil or somehow complicit. And by the way, at that time, perhaps because it was in the aftermath of a tragic injustice, many of the people rightly condemning the Capitol violence were silent or indeed actively encouraging the violence then. Now, I'll concede that in a dictatorship or a society where the rule of law does not prevail, then maybe violence may be required. But that's not America. Violence, particularly against innocent civilians in a functioning democracy, is never the way to achieve change. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, hate begets hate, violence begets violence. And what we are seeing is all a symptom of the dualism that pervades America and the West, seeing the other side as evil. It's what leads to chants of "lock her up," or as we just saw trending on Twitter, "hang Mike Pence." Perhaps Twitter's double standards too in terminating Trump's account, but allowing anti-Semites like Ayatollah Khamenei, shows they may also perhaps be part of the problem. Perhaps they're also engaged in a dualism where they don't treat all sides with fairness and equality. Now, this video is not about the pros or cons of censorship. It's about being fair if you're going to censor. Again, for more of my concerns about Twitter, you can watch the other video that we're posting on JTV. So, how do we fight dualism? How do we fight seeing the other side as evil? Well, it all starts with one word: communication. If you can communicate healthily with respect for the other side's concerns, then you can make progress as a society. Sometimes you can't always agree, indeed often you can't, but if you can accept certain basic premises, then communication can allow you to find a middle path. Business people understand this. You have to negotiate in business. There's no point being violent. Why shouldn't it be the same in politics? Make your case, explain your needs, hear what the other side says, try to validate them where you can, work out a path that works for both sides. The same can apply in politics. Because when communication breaks down, that's where violence begins. So what are these basic premises that need to be accepted? It starts with a concept Judaism articulated from the very beginning of its narrative of the human story. That all human beings are created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God, and thus they all have infinite value and should be treated with dignity. Judaism rejects dualism. Indeed, as Rabbi Sachs said, being chosen doesn't mean others are rejected. It doesn't divide humanity into good and bad. It might support dividing ideas into good and bad, but not human beings. All humans have the potential for good. And when you start with that premise, when you see your opponent as worthy of basic respect, communication can begin. And guess what? These are the very ideas and ideals that inspired the founders of America at her inception. Inspired by the Bible's belief in the sanctity of the individual, the founders wrote in the Declaration of Independence that we are all created equal and endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. You can only defeat hatred and dualism, and you can only have effective communication when you accept that the fellow citizen you are arguing with also has a right to be heard, to basic dignity and respect. That all humans have basic rights and should be respected. We don't all need to think the same to have civility. We just need to respect each person's right to be heard. In Judaism, one of our holiest places is a place of people shouting and screaming at each other. It's called a Beit Midrash, a house of learning, a yeshiva, where people are debating concepts, ideas. They're not attacking each other personally, they're challenging the ideas the other person has said, both in the pursuit of finding the truth. The Talmud tells us that the views of the school of Hillel became law because, quote, they were pleasant and did not take offence, and because they taught the views of their opponents as well as their own. Indeed, they taught the views of their opponents before their own. The great irony of all this is that in a democracy, violence to achieve political ends doesn't even work. All it does is further alienate the other side and create more tension. Judaism was never a proselytizing religion because it believed you can't impose truth by force. You change the world through persuasion. As Rabbi Sachs put it, through the power of the idea, not the idea of power. And for all its benefits, social media, I think, actually plays a huge part in the breakdown of communication. Because think about it, social media rewards the short, snappy statements, the gotchas, the words or statements that can get the most clicks or the most likes or the most hearts or evoke the most emotions. It doesn't help for nuanced debate where people can try and communicate with one another in a healthy way. I've actually found that when I have conversations with people on politics from all political persuasions, that actually we can agree on a huge amount. But social media doesn't encourage that. You have keyboard warriors where people feel like they can say whatever they want because they're protected behind the screen. People are a lot more rude and vindictive when they're not speaking to each other face to face. And this is a big part of the problem. We need to rethink how we can prevent social media from polarizing political discourse even further, which is a huge part of the problem we're facing at the moment. Civil discourse may look bleak for America and the West, but I still believe that most people out there are decent, who want civility and progress through peaceful means. I think many people, both on the left and the right, myself included, have felt in recent years that in order to maintain our political allegiances, we've had to brush off more and more unpalatable rhetoric. Most people want the tone to go down a notch, and for the calm, level-headed communication to go up. To finish, I want to go back to the Torah reading we read this past Shabbat, the start of the book of Exodus. After Moses kills one of the Egyptian slave masters who's beating a Jewish slave, putting his own Egyptian status in jeopardy, Moses then sees another two Jewish slaves bickering with one another. As Moses tries to break the fight up, one of the Jews screams at Moses and says, "Do you plan to slay me as you have slain the Egyptian?" The next verse says, Moses became frightened and said, quote, "Indeed, the matter has become known." The Torah commentator Rashi said on a basic level, when Moses said to himself, "The matter has become known," it means he realized it had become widespread knowledge that he'd killed one of the Egyptian slave masters. So Moses now realized the Egyptian authorities are going to come after him. But Rashi says it also means something else on a deeper level. When Moses said the matter has become known, it means Moses now understood the source of the Jewish people's suffering and the work they must do to redeem themselves as a nation. Its internal hatred towards one another. That, he realized, was the source of their suffering. The Torah tells us that the root of a nation's suffering is an inability to look at your fellow citizen with basic dignity and respect. And the path towards national unity and healing isn't uniformity, but where you can listen to each other's grievances and find a way to move forward together.